They thought I was finished. They sat across from me at that big oak table in the conference room. My son-in-law, with that smirk he always wore when he thought he had the upper hand. My daughter not even looking at me, just scrolling through phone like I wasn't worth the effort. And they genuinely believed it was over. I'm 63 years old. I spent 41 years building a cabinet-making business from nothing. Not from a loan, not from a family inheritance, not from some lucky break, from a second-hand table I bought at an estate sale in 1983, a rented garage in Decatur, Illinois, and hands that bled more times than I can count. My name is Harold Voss, and that name is on the side of 3 delivery trucks, on the door of a shop that employs 11 people, and on a building I paid off in full in 2009. I say this not to brag. I say this because you need to understand what they were trying to take. My daughter, Melissa. She was my whole world after her mother passed. Breast cancer 2011. I won't go into that. Some grief you just carry. After the funeral, it was just the two of us. I threw myself into the shop. Melissa threw herself into school, got her marketing degree, came back to Decatur, and started helping me with the business side of things. Those were good years. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's laugh, and sometimes when she'd walk into the shop on a Saturday morning with 2 cups of coffee from the place on Water Street, I'd have to look away for a second. Then she met Derek. I want to be fair. I tried to be fair from the beginning. Derek Colton was from Springfield, worked in commercial real estate, drove a car that cost more than my first house. He was charming the way a man is charming when he's practiced at it. Smooth answers, good eye contact, remembered your birthday. Melissa was 31 when they started dating. She didn't need my approval, and I knew that. But I noticed things. The way he'd redirect conversations about money. The way he'd make small jokes at my expense. Little things. Nothing you could call him out on directly. And the way he looked at my shop. Not with admiration, but with calculation. They married in the fall of 2019. I paid for the wedding. $47,000 at a venue outside of Springfield. I didn't complain. I danced with my daughter. And for one evening, I let myself believe I was wrong about him. I wasn't. It started small. Derek suggested Melissa take a more formal role in the business. Chief Operating Officer, he said, as though a family cabinet shop needed a COO. I said sure, because she'd been helping anyway, and I wanted her close. Then he suggested I incorporate more formally, restructure the LLC, bring in an outside accountant, a guy named Stu, who I later found out was Derek's college roommate. Again, I said okay. I trusted Melissa. I trusted that she wouldn't let anything happen to what I built. For about 1.5 years, nothing seemed obviously wrong. Stu filed the taxes. Melissa handled invoicing and payroll. I was in the shop, doing what I'd always done, designing pieces, overseeing the guys, meeting with clients. I was 61 years old. My knees weren't what they used to be. I told myself I was delegating, not stepping back. That was what I told myself. The first real crack came on a Tuesday in March of 2022. One of my oldest employees, a man named Chip, who'd been with me since the early 2000s, came to me after hours. He closed the shop door behind him and he looked at the floor before he looked at me. He said, "Harold, I don't want to cause trouble." I told him he wasn't causing trouble. He said he'd overheard a phone call. Derek had been in the shop the previous Friday. I'd been out meeting a client in Bloomington, and Chip heard him tell someone on the phone that the real estate on Route 48, which was where my shop sat on a half-acre commercial lot I owned outright, was essentially available. Essentially available. I thanked Chip. I told him to go home. And then I sat in my office for a long time with the lights off. I didn't confront Melissa that night. I've learned in 63 years that the thing you do when you're scared and angry is the wrong thing. So I waited, and while I waited, I started paying attention in a different way. I pulled every financial document I could access. The incorporation restructure from 2020 had quietly shifted some operational authority, not ownership, but operational authority, into a secondary entity that Derek had suggested we form for tax efficiency. Voss Cabinet Works remained the primary LLC, but there was now a management company layered underneath called MV Operations LLC. I had signed the paperwork. I remembered signing it, but I didn't remember understanding it. Stu had walked me through it in about 12 minutes over a lunch I didn't pay attention to, because I was half thinking about a walnut sideboard I was building for a client in Champaign. I went to see a lawyer, not the firm Derek had recommended 2 years prior. A different one, a woman named Elaine Burrows, who had an office above a dry cleaner on Main Street and who had been practicing business law in Central Illinois for 30 years. I spread the documents out on her desk, and I told her everything, start to finish. She read in silence for a long time. Then she took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She said, "Harold, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them honestly regardless of what the answers mean." I said okay. She asked who had originally drafted the MB operations agreement. Derek's contact. She asked who the registered agent was for MB Operations LLC, also Derek's contact. She asked whether I had retained a personal copy of all documents bearing my signature. I told her I had the copy Stu had given me. She asked if I was certain those were complete sets. I said I wasn't. She looked at me and said quietly, "You may have a problem." I drove home that night on autopilot. I made a pot of coffee and I sat at the kitchen table, the same table my wife and I bought at a garage sale in 1988, a pine table with a water stain on one corner that we always meant to fix and never did, and I thought about what I was willing to do. By May of 2022, I had a much clearer picture, and it was worse than I'd feared. Through Elaine, I obtained a full independent audit of the business finances going back to the restructure. What we found was methodical and patient and, I'll admit, almost clever if it hadn't been targeted at me. MV Operations LLC was billing Voss Cabinet Works a monthly management fee, a fee I had approved in the original agreement, buried in the language that had been quietly escalating. It had started at $1,200 a month, which seemed reasonable enough that I hadn't flagged it. By early 2022, it was $8,400 a month. Over approximately 20 months, just under $90,000 had been extracted from my business through this mechanism into MV Operations, which Derek effectively controlled through a series of steps that Elaine explained to me carefully, and that I will not pretend I fully understood in the moment. There was more. Stu had filed amended documents for the secondary LLC that named Derek as a co-managing member with equal operational authority. Those documents bore what appeared to be my signature. I did not remember signing them. Elaine told me we would need a forensic document examiner. I asked her what our options were. She said we could go to civil court, seek to unwind the restructuring, pursue the misappropriated funds, and potentially involve law enforcement if the signature issue proved what we suspected. I asked how long. She said probably 2 years minimum, possibly longer. I asked if there was a faster way. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "There might be, but you're going to have to be patient in a different way." What Elaine suggested, and what I agreed to, was a strategy I never would have thought of on my own. We would let them believe they had already won. We would not tip our hand. We would allow Derek and Melissa to proceed with whatever they were planning, which Elaine suspected involved pushing me toward a voluntary retirement arrangement that would formalize the transfer of operational control, while quietly, methodically, assembling every piece of evidence we needed. Elaine brought in a forensic accountant named Price from an outfit in Peoria. Price was small and quiet, and wore the same brown cardigan almost every time I met with him, and he was the most meticulous person I had ever encountered. He went through everything, every invoice, every wire transfer, every amended filing. He also flagged something Elaine and I had missed. 2 vendor accounts had been created in the prior year, with billing addresses that traced back to a property Derek owned in Springfield. Money had been flowing out of Voss Cabinet Works to these phantom vendors for materials that had never been ordered, never received, never referenced in any production record. By that point, we were looking at over $140,000 in total. Meanwhile, I went to work every morning. I said good morning to Chip and the rest of the guys. I had coffee. I built cabinets. When Melissa called, I answered warmly. When Derek came around, which was less frequent now, I noticed as though he was already beginning to detach. I was cordial. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, harder than the early years when I couldn't make payroll and I maxed out a personal credit card to cover it, harder than sitting in a hospital room in 2011. Because this was a performance every single day, and the audience was my own daughter. There were nights I almost called her. I'd sit in the kitchen with the phone in my hand, and I'd think about what I would say. "I love you, and I don't understand how we got here. I want to give you a chance to explain." But Elaine had been clear. The moment I showed my hand, they would have time to move assets, alter records, find counter-arguments. So I put the phone down and I went to bed. In September of 2022, it happened the way Elaine had anticipated. Melissa came to the shop on a Wednesday afternoon and asked if we could talk privately. We went into my office. She had a folder. She set it on my desk with the careful precision of someone who has rehearsed the moment. She said she and Derek had been thinking about the future of the business and about my well-being, and they felt it was time to discuss a formal succession arrangement. The folder contained a document called a Voluntary Management Transition Agreement. Essentially, it proposed that I would step back from all operational decisions, retain a nominal ownership title, receive a fixed monthly payment of $2,200, and transfer all executive authority to, and I'm going to pause here because I still feel it when I say it, to Derek Colton, $2,200 a month. My business grossed over $800,000 the prior year. I looked at the document. I looked at my daughter. I thought about her mother. I thought about her mother. I thought about the pine table in my kitchen. I picked up a pen and I said, "Can I have a few days to look this over?" She smiled. It was her mother's smile on a face I didn't recognize in that moment. She said, "Of course, Dad. Take all the time you need." I did not sign it, but I didn't say no. I let it sit. Elaine said we were close, and I trusted Elaine. In November of 2022, Price completed his forensic report. Elaine filed a civil complaint in Macon County Circuit Court and simultaneously submitted a referral to the Decatur Police Department Financial Crimes Unit and the Illinois Attorney General's Office. The complaint named Derek Colton and Stu, whose full name was Stuart Aldrich, as defendants. It alleged wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of business assets, and, based on Price's handwriting analysis referral, potential document forgery. Derek and Melissa were served on a Thursday morning. Elaine told me later that the process server reported Derek answered the door in a bathrobe. I was at the shop when I got the call. I set down the piece of maple I'd been sanding, walked out to the parking lot, and stood in the November cold for a minute. Just breathe. The civil hearing was scheduled for late January 2023. I want to tell you about that day because it matters. I arrived early. I wore a charcoal suit I hadn't worn since my wife's funeral. I'd had it cleaned and pressed. I shined my own shoes. When I walked into the courthouse, I walked in the way my father taught me to walk into any room, like you belong there, like you've already decided the outcome. Derek and Melissa arrived together. He was in an expensive suit. She was in a coat I didn't recognize, something new. They were with their attorney, a man from Springfield who billed $300 an hour and who immediately tried to have the complaint dismissed on procedural grounds. The judge, a woman named the Honorable Patricia Sousa, denied that motion without much deliberation. There was a moment, right before the proceedings began, when Derek caught my eye across the room. He smiled. It was the same practiced, smooth smile he'd worn since the first time Melissa brought him to Sunday dinner. The smile of a man who had already decided he won. I looked at him steadily, and I said nothing. Judge Sousa was methodical and unhurried. She reviewed the exhibits Elaine had submitted, the full forensic accounting, Price's report, the comparative analysis of the signature in question versus verified samples of my handwriting. Derek's attorney objected to the signature evidence. Judge Susan noted the objection and overruled it. Then Elaine submitted one final exhibit. It was a recording, entirely legal in Illinois as a single-party consent state, made on the day Melissa had brought that folder to my office. I had placed my phone face down on the desk before she arrived, its voice memo application running. The recording captured Melissa explaining the transition agreement. It captured her saying, when I asked whether I had any choice in the matter, "Dad, honestly, Derek says if you don't sign, things could get complicated." It captured her saying, when I asked what that meant, "Just sign it, okay? It's better for everyone." The room was very quiet when that recording finished. Derek's attorney asked for a recess. Judge Sousa declined. What followed was not a dramatic scene from a movie. Judge Sousa did not bang her gavel and shout. She was quiet and precise and completely devastating. She granted the civil complaint in full. She ordered the immediate dissolution of MV Operations LLC. She ordered the recovery of all funds transferred through the management fee structure and the phantom vendor accounts, $147,300 in total, to be returned to Voss Cabinet Works within 60 days, with interest. She ordered all amended LLC documents bearing the disputed signature to be voided, and she referred the matter to the state's attorney for criminal review, specifically regarding the document forgery and wire fraud allegations. Stuart Aldrich had already, apparently, begun cooperating with investigators. He accepted a plea agreement several months later, 2 years probation, full restitution of fees he personally received, and surrender of his CPA license. Derek Colton was charged criminally in the spring. He eventually pled guilty to wire fraud and misappropriation. He was sentenced to 18 months in a federal minimum security facility in Pekin, Illinois, and ordered to pay full restitution plus $40,000 in civil penalties. Melissa was not criminally charged. The evidence suggested she had been significantly influenced by Derek and had not been the architect of the scheme. I want to be honest about how I feel about that, because I've had a lot of time to think about it. I think she knew things she told herself were acceptable because she loved him. I think she made choices she can't fully explain to herself now. I don't know how to carry that. I'm still figuring it out. She called me 4 months after the hearing. She didn't lead with an apology. She just said, "Dad, I need to tell you something." And she cried for about 3 minutes before she could say anything else. I let her cry. I didn't fill the silence. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't know how far it had gone, and then she said she thought she had known and had looked away, and that was the more honest version. I believed the second one. I told her I believed the second one. We're not where we were. I don't know if we'll get there, but she came to Decatur in March, and I made her coffee in the kitchen, and she sat at that pine table with the water stain, and we talked for 4 hours. That's something. Chip still works at the shop. I gave him a raise, an actual raise, not some nominee gesture, a real one, because that conversation he had with me in March of 2022 with his eyes on the floor cost him something, and it gave me everything. He shrugged and said he was just doing what was right. I told him that's the hardest thing there is. I still go to the shop 6 days a week. My knees are worse. There's a piece of white oak I'm working on right now. A dining table for a couple in Champaign who just built a house. The grain on this particular piece is something I've never seen before. This diagonal figure that runs the whole length. I've been working it slowly, by hand mostly, not rushing it. Some things you don't rush. I'm 63 years old. My name is on 3 trucks, on a building I own, on 41 years of work that no signature on a fraudulent document was ever going to erase. They thought I was asleep. They thought patience was the same thing as weakness. I have never been more awake in my life.